everybody, I'm Natalia Bonner. All right, so today's video is going to be a table runner, something different than what I usually share with you. I usually am sharing full quilts, but I thought it would be fun just to share this little runner with you and the different ways that I quilted this fun runner. So before we actually do get to the quilting, like I always tell you, I do all my quilting on a Gamma 22-inch machine. Yes, this is hand-guided quilting. I have my stitch length set at 12 stitches per inch, and I am going to switch thread colors on this quilt. On a few of the portions, you'll see there are other quilts or other colors in the quilt top. When we get to those portions, I will walk you through that and talk to you about each of those colors. But I am sticking with so fine thread on the top, bottom line on my bobbin, and I'm using one layer of the Quilter's Dream wool batting on this fun little runner. Let's get stitching. So here's the cute little runner before I begin any machine quilting. So a couple of things that I do want to point out on this fun runner before I actually get started. The way that this runner was made, it's done with hand applique. The ornaments are hand appliqued on, but they were hand appliqued with one layer of batting behind those blocks. So there's already quite a bit of bulk that's going on here with those. And you might be able to see it a little bit better as I'm machine quilting, but that definitely does play a factor into the way the quilt can be quilted or will be quilted with the extra bulk behind those. The next thing that I'll point out, so on each of the white background blocks, so the 3 of the blocks, I'm going to do just a heavy clam filler in the background. It'll be a more dense filler that just really can help the ornaments pop a little bit. On the outside border, I'm going to keep it really simple, straight lines radiating out from the center of the runner. There's a lot going on with the piecing. It's kind of scrappy patchwork. So most designs that I quilt in there could either fight with that design or just really disappear into it. So I'm thinking, let's just keep it really simple. Then on the blocks that have the red background, I'm going to add a fun little curl background filler. It'll keep it a little bit more simple. It will not fight with the white background filler that's next to it. Yes, I will change thread colors because that's just what's best on this quilt. It would look kind of funny if I did white on there. Then moving on to each of the ornaments, because like I mentioned, there is double batting on those. It's the bulk that we're dealing with. So I'm going to keep the quilting a little bit more simple and just outline, add a few zigzag lines where I can. But let's get to the quilting. So I'll start out the quilt by stitching that outside border and along the top border. Now I'm going to use, like I mentioned, just the simple back and forth straight lines that are spaced a ½ inch apart. When I stitch out lines like this, I like to start at my lowest point on the left hand side of the quilt because I am working on the long arm. If I were working on a domestic, obviously I would start in the center and work my way out. This would be the last portion that I would quilt on my quilt. So to line up the lines and make sure that I've got straight lines going through there, I'll start out at the bottom, and I generally will try to line it up so that it's straight along with the bottom of the quilt. However, the bottom isn't always as square as it needs to be. So I can line up the side of my ruler against that inside seam just to give me a little bit of extra security or just a little bit of extra to know that that line is straight. So I'll work my way. You can see here that I travel along the ditch or the outside, moving back and forth in those ½ inch spacing. I am using the color number 401, so it definitely stands out a bit more here on the red fabrics, but I think overall you get the idea how fabulous it looks. Now, when I do quilt these straight lines, a lot of times you'll see that I do a mitered corner when I get up to the corner. But with a design like this, I actually am going to follow the patchwork and I won't do that mitered corner. But if it was a design that had the same color fabric in both sides, unlike this, how there's 2 different prints, if I had the same fabric going on, I would do the mitered corner with those straight lines. Now I'm moving on and starting to quilt on that first block. So you can possibly see here as I'm stitching out that there is quite a bit of bulk there with the 2 layers of batting, but like I mentioned, I still feel like I'm able to get a great result. So I do stitch in the ditch all the way around the outside of the block before I begin the machine quilting. Now, I don't necessarily believe that there's a right or wrong time whether to do stitch in the ditch first or last. Sometimes I'll do it the very last, sometimes I do it first. It really just depends on the design and what feels most natural to me. So after I've stitched in the ditch around the outside, then I'm going to travel down and stitch around the outside of the ornament. This is a place where I feel it's important to add stitching. Outlining to me really sets things apart from the background. So you'll see I do not have a ruler that matches every applique shape perfectly. So I've taught myself how to adjust my 4-in-1 machine quilting ruler as I go to help me stitch all the way around. It's more as a guide, not necessarily following an exact line. Once I've stitched all the way around that ornament on the outside of it, then I'm going to begin adding a fun background filler. The design that I've chose to add here is my clam design. Now I do teach you step by step how to quilt this design in my book, Beginner's Guide to Free Motion Quilting. But I think you can kind of get the idea just from watching this and see how I quilt it out. It's basically beginning with one teardrop or clam shape and adding some fun echoes to the outside of it. I love the density. It's a great design to give a little bit of a soft touch to a filler, but it goes really fastly. I don't think that's a word, really quickly. And it also kind of gives you the effect of a swirl, but in my opinion, it's almost kind of like a cheater swirl. You don't have to be thinking ahead like you do with the swirls. Just add some echoes whenever you need to travel. So now I've moved on to the third block. You can see that I did travel over to this third block along that top border. I use that as my traveling stitches. So like I'm always telling you, I'm always looking for ways to get from one point to another without having to stop and cut my threads. Whenever I can make that possible, I'm a happy quilter. So this is just a little different angle, different view. You know, I'm always trying to give you guys as much as I can and inspire you as much as possible. So just another view. Again, this is the third block and I'm stitching this one out with that same clam background filler. So now that I've completed the background filler on the white blocks, I'm going to move on and stitch the background filler on the red blocks. So I'm going to stitch out this fun little curl design. Now this particular design, when I stitch it out, there's not necessarily any rhyme or reason to the design. It's just I stitch a curl, stitch back along my previous stitch line, and then start another curl. I do try to alternate directions with those curls. Doesn't always happen. They're not always perfect, but I do try to. Now, if I ever get stuck in a place or feel like I need to travel to a new spot to start a curl, I can easily travel along my ditch or along the outline line around the ornament. So with this design, something else I do want to point out with this curl, I don't think that it has to be perfect. There are definitely times where my stitching is not exactly right over itself. It doesn't overlap as perfectly as maybe You would think it should, but that's okay. I feel like when there's a little bit of open, a little bit of spacing between my lines when I'm backtracking, sometimes it gives it more of a ribbony look, and I really like that look. And while I'm using my red thread, I'm going to continue on and do a little bit of stitching on this this zigzag ornament. So you'll see here that I'm just following along on the red lines, stitching straight lines. A lot of times my machine quilting inspiration really does come from the fabric itself. So with this design, it's perfect. I'll stitch along those red lines in the zigzag just to kind of stabilize, hold down, create a little bit more texture on that ornament. And just a final little peek at this fun runner after the machine quilting is all done. So like I said, I did leave it a little bit loose on the ornaments because I really wanted those just to kind of pop a little bit. I did outline on the ornaments right around the elements that are on those. So around the rickrack, I outlined around the little band on the snowflake one, and the other two, just simple outlining along the bands.